Welcome back, and one of our best guests ever is Lowell Ponte, and one of the most brilliant financial people, co-author with Craig Smith. Craig is a billionaire, of course, and obviously he has the smarts about us. Anybody who's successful in anything, medicine, business, politics, whatever, has to know the field in which they're working, has to be able to tell themselves the truth, because you can't succeed unless you deal with the truth. And you have a whole series of books that you and Craig have written. This latest one, what's it called, Lowell?
The latest one is We Have Seen the Future, and it looks like Baltimore. Subtitle, American Dream versus Progressive Dream, showing what happens when the progressives take over and unilaterally run as a monopoly a major city like Baltimore for 60 or more years. They take people from welfare addiction to heroin addiction. Baltimore, I think, still holds the title now as the heroin capital of the U.S. About 1 out of every 10 people there is an addict.
Yeah. Now, we have a perfect example of what I call of a political Bolshevik in Bernie Sanders. And he's very passionate, but the man is completely incapable of a cognizant answer as to how he's going to achieve what he wants to do, which is why social communism in his current idea never succeeds, because if you can't build an engine to generate the economy to give people the things they need, you can't ever do it. So that's what happened in the Soviet Union. I remember a statement by someone who said they visited recently Cuba that gets $24 per month in current income. They say we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. And,
right, that was also a famous statement in the Soviet Union. But in the West, Margaret Thatcher purportedly famously said, socialism works wonderfully until you run out of other people's money.
Right.
And if people are free to leave, of course, that running out can happen very soon. This is why the current administration has just clamped down on companies trying to move into a partnership with a foreign company to cut their tax bill. Since we have the heaviest business taxes of any major country in the West.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And so the question is, our ancestors had a right to move here in order to seek freedom and lower taxes, and yet somehow the current administration says their descendants should now not be allowed to move to escape high taxes here.
Wow. So in other words, you can't move from state to state is what you're trying to say. Now, I heard a comment...
State or nation to nation, either one. It works both ways.
Well, I see the transnational corporations do that freely. And, of course, you hear about Obama now talking about international tax law needs to be changed so they can seize money from corporations that are parking it all over the world, because the federal approach... For example, the middle-income people in the smaller, medium-sized businesses in Canada pay about 15% corporate taxes. It's around 40 to 45% here in America. I mean... Why do you think you're going to compete with Ontario, Canada, when you're building cars? And they just as well could move to Ontario as move to Mexico. So, why do people in America think that when they have a out-of-control occupational health care system, an out-of-control health care system that charges way too much, and a system where the insurance carriers basically wrote the bill for Obamacare, and Obama's sitting there really proud of it, when really it's a total collapse and disaster. I can't believe it when I saw this Chris Wallace interview. It's like, this man is so narcissistically delusional, he lives in his own world of delusions. It's amazing.
Well, it's interesting. He was undiluted enough to promise people that they'd save $2,500 a year through Obamacare, and they'd be allowed to keep their own doctor. Well, neither of those promises was serious when he made it. In fact, he told a labor union at the time that, of course, he recognized his goal was the same as theirs, namely outright socialized medicine.
Right.
But he said it would take about 10 years. In other words, you have to use Obamacare to destroy the current health care system, and then there'll only be one health care system left for people, and that's the health care system of socialism under Medicare, Medicaid, and the like.
Now, the problem with this now is, and of course, this is what Trump came up with. He years ago thought about a single-payer system, but he realized a single-payer system results in a system that's what I call factory mediocre medicine, like in Canada or in Britain, where alternative care is not considered reasonable. Even if the doctors know in published studies that using less medications and more nutraceuticals, more interventions involving other technology like mild hyperbaric oxygen and other therapies can dramatically improve the health and the recovery of their patients, including stem cell transplants and peptide modulators and anti-aging therapies and so on. Many of these are nutrapharmaceuticals. As I mentioned, I have contacts with doctors that have nutrapharmaceuticals that are neither nutritionals nor pharmaceuticals that alter DNA activity in stem cells. We have these right now, that they're not imaginary. And we have stem cell transplants. We have all kinds of technology like StemMedica in San Diego that has a clinic in Astana, Kazakhstan, and one in Tijuana where you can actually get very high-dose stem cells. We have other clinics that do all kinds of things all over the world, and people say, well, you can't do it here in America. Of course not. This is a regulatory nightmare between the state medical boards and the federal government. Like the fatal drugs allowed people, the FDA, it's insane. It's absolutely insane.
When my father was dying of cancer, he became a drug smuggler. I mean, he would go to Mexico to buy over-the-counter all those drugs the FDA would not allow here, even though they were widely used in Europe.
Right, exactly. So what I find is, and when doctors try to defend this current system and say they're worried about medical legal issues and about the issue of child abuse, for example, I've seen cases where, and they contact me all the time, where a child, let's say the 13 or 14-year-old girl, is told that the state is going to seize her and force her to take chemotherapy when alternative treatments, which are off-the-label use of low-dose chemo and other drugs based on gene-based analysis of their cancer without radiation and other treatments, is far more successful, and they won't end up bleeding to death or falling their hair fall out or developing post-chemo brain or post-chemo heart failure. No. The state is going to determine the manner in which your child will be poisoned and or die. And
I much prefer the idea of, what do they call it, last chance laws, where if you're diagnosed as likely to die in 6 months or whatever, of course you should have the human freedom to go try any treatment you can find to try to save your own life.
Yeah, well, the problem, I think, is that they think somehow if you start developing health problems, and I see this in what I call factory medicine, and there's a number of factory medicine insurances like Kaiser here in California, where as soon as you develop health problems, they think you're mentally incompetent and you can't make a decision to decide to take something or deny it. It's an obscene way of approaching healthcare people, isn't it?
Well, I mean, they've gone to the extent already under Mr. Obama of saying if you need help maintaining your budgeting and keeping your books when you're a senior citizen, that alone disqualifies you from being able to buy a gun because it shows you're not entirely mentally competent, even though there's no indication you're a danger to anyone over anything.
Right.
So the government uses any pretext it can to take more power over our lives, and those are two of them. Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. In fact, we've had our activists protecting veterans, where more than 250,000 veterans have lost their ability to actually carry a gun or even a concealed carry because somehow no proof that they're psychiatrically getting dementia, but maybe their wife handles their bills, or maybe they had a bout of PTSD or depression when they returned from 2 or 3 tours of duty. It's just obscene. Now let's translate this into progressivism. Progressivism is a psychotic form, and it's being taught. Basically, most of the universities across America are teaching a form of cultural Marxism. And progressivism is what I call the final metastatic form that destroys the body politic of a society. So eventually it decays to total chaos. And it's taught in big universities like Princeton that want to take away the First Amendment because they don't want anybody to criticize anybody on any grounds. In fact, it can be grounds to be sent to prison if you are critical. And these people want to set up a high priesthood where the priests are removing the idea of scientific investigation and facts, and removing the idea of a dialogue, not necessarily a dialogue of abuse, but a dialogue of calling the truth. For example, when I see Gert Velders, who's actually on the videos by Jonathan Gray, that talks about, he's from Europe, from the Netherlands, and he talks about Islam preaches murder, and it teaches that you must follow the precepts of Muhammad and you can't criticize him or you'll have a fatwa put on your head. The fact is that Islam has many scriptures that teach very clearly that you're going to kill people until they submit to Allah, and his only messenger is Muhammad. You know, that's the facts. Now, if you say that in Europe, you're going to go to jail, including some of the senior politicians in France. And here in America, they'd like that to be here as well. By the way, in Canada, where I had a radio show, they threatened to arrest me when I had my show in Genesis back between 2003 and 2008 when I came back. I was only there a few years, and I threatened them back, and they didn't do it. But that's an example of another progressive country. So let's return and talk about the issues in this book. How do they obtain the book? What's the title again? And the fact is the book literally is free, but they need to get the contact numbers and know how to contact you.
Oh, sure, absolutely. The book is called We Have Seen the Future, and it looks like Baltimore. Baltimore being an object lesson in the dream wars between the American dream and the progressive dream. The progressive dream is a collectivist movement, has nothing to do with liberalism. It believes that you exist only as a member of certain collectives, like what race are you, what ethnicity are you, and so on. And you are supposed to be true to your team, meaning your skin color and other things. And then that is all to be governed by a tiny elite of philosopher king-like rulers who are in the business of bringing about heaven on earth, of creating a new Eden by using science and big government. Not God. I mean, it's a very anti-God movement because they want no authority in the world except themselves. And that's the kind of governance you get from the left. I mean, think of Michael Bloomberg telling you how large a can of soda pop you're allowed to drink. These are nanny statists. They are advocates of a paternalistic government. And, of course, to have a paternalistic system, that means the government is the dad, and everyone else is infantilized. Everyone else is turned into a child dependent on the government.
Right, right. And we see that with the infantilized systems like the healthcare system here in California called Kaiser. It's got a good name, Kaiser, which means like the Caesar or the king or the emperor.
Mm-hmm.
And
but do you know what Caesar means?
Yeah, let's the Kaiser. Yeah, what does it mean?
Kaiser and Tsar both come from the word Caesar originally, but Caesar referred to Julius Caesar, and it was a slang Latin use at the time attached to his family, meaning he had a large head of hair. This was a joke, by the way, among Romans, because he was nearly bald and very embarrassed about it. And tried to hide it all the time. So that's how the term Caesar came down to us in the words Tsar and Kaiser today.
So it's actually a play, basically a slur against the fact that he's bald.
Yeah, it was mockery of Julius Caesar at the first usage.
Oh, that's really funny.
And it just became a title.
So the Caesar became the guy with a full head of hair, but it was actually a guy that was actually bald, so it was a slur.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's too funny. I never knew that.
Isn't history strange, though? And you could have cured him, I'll bet.
Yes, we can, actually, between hair transplants, things like a recidival hair tonic, collagen max, stem cell transplants. We even have peptides now that will alter your DNA and reactivate your genes to grow hair.
I thought just using pine tar or oil tar on your head would often bring hair back.
That might have worked 200 years ago. We have more advanced stuff now.
Our hair is different now. Okay.
No, well, the thing is, now we know actually how to, for example, even in women that get balding, they actually have activation of their male hormone receptors. So you measure their saliva levels of androstenedione and testosterone and high dihydrotestosterone, you find...
So as a scientist, what is that thing on Donald Trump's head?
That thing, it actually is a separate creature. It's an alien.
Aha.
No,
just like actually, Men in Black. I should have.
I'll tell you what I think is happening. I think he's got balding, but he has a really advanced, just like he's a Caesar, in other words. But what he does is he grows a swoop to cover up, and his hairdresser is able to kind of fuse that hair so it won't move in the wind. I don't think it's a hairpiece. I think it's actually his hair, but I have a feeling it swooped around and kind of. He's starched or
most of the growth is on the inside. Who knows? But I just realized I'm losing my mind too. I forgot to tell people how they get the book absolutely free.
I know we're having too much fun.
252-page book. Just call toll free 1-800-630-1494. That's 1-800-630-1494. Or as I like to say, think of Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492, but not quite.
Repeat that once more. Repeat it again.
1-800-630-1494.
Yeah, now I'll put that number up on the site as well. Yeah, 1492. 2 years after Columbus. How's that?
Okay.
You use that mnemonic. You have a whole series of books, and what people don't understand is progressivism is an evil scheme where somehow the progressives are delusional, think they can make a dark alliance with Islam, and somehow they're going to come out on top with Islam being their bed partner. How's that?
Well, they can use Islam as a weapon to get rid of certain things they want to get rid of.
But then they got to get rid of
what will happen to Islam is interesting. Almost all of its power in the world has come from oil lately. In fact, it's kind of a joke in Israel that they will say to each other, "Darn it, Moses, if you just turned right instead of left, we'd have had the oil and they'd have had the sand."
Well, the fact is, I'll tell you something interesting. Back in 1999, I told Hayseed Stephen, who had been to Israel 18 times before that, and was working with the Israeli oil company and Ariel Sharon about the geology at the southwest end of the Dead Sea, and he'd already been there. And I told him things that only his FICO knew, their oil engineer that discovered the Leviathan fields south of Cyprus, and the fields in Zohar, which are the only gas fields in Israel. The largest supply of oil on the planet is at the southwest end of the Dead Sea. 27.2 trillion, a giant batholith of oil, 14 times world oil proven oil reserves. High quality oil, and it's the main feeder for all the oil in the Middle East, is that giant batholith. So no, Israel's sitting on the largest supply of oil and 95% of the potash on the entire planet. So
why are they so secretive about it?
They're secretive about it because they want to expand to greater Israel. This scheme that's going on with America and NATO is to eventually cause such destruction to Libya and all the empires around it that they eventually, if they don't take over the territory, these broken nations basically are managed peripherally around Israel as, in the sense of vassals to the state of Israel. Even the oil, for example, in Iraq is, in a sense, under our control, but it's given over to the China Oil Company that is now the fifth largest oil refining company in the world, and they didn't exist before Gulf War I and II. So what people need to understand, globalism is designed to make sure that they basically deconstruct America, break down our borders, make us a trade zone, destroy our families, destroy sexual orientation. I mean, I watched 60 Minutes last night, and they had this young girl, and I'm thinking, if we have a technical problem where there's so much fluoride and xenotoxins in the environment, we're starting to change the sexual orientation of people with rewiring their brain. Let's fix it, not fluoridated water and add we call endocrine disruptors, so it screws up the biology of our population. Let's not decide that when 25% of the population are now functionally sterile because of our environment, that it's okay to make, our solution is to make 34 different designations of sexual orientation rather than fix the environment that's making it so that an alligator farmer in Florida can't even tell between the male and female alligators because he has to turn them over to determine their sexual parts. That's what's going on in the human race. And when I talk to people, they think, well, Dr. Deagle, it's just a matter that now, compared to 200 years ago, you couldn't do a bilateral mastectomy like this girl, Skylar or Baylor, at Harvard, that had a bilateral mastectomy and is going on male hormones to be a male swimmer in the swim team, where she was winning as a female because she's quote a trans. What people need to understand, these people are physically, mentally, and toxicologically sick, which is why our sperm counts dropped to half or less what it was in the 1950s.
And all you really need to do to validate that is look at the fertility rates. Right, which are relatively obtainable. I mean, you need 2.1 children just for every couple, just to maintain your population. The U.S. recently under Obama fell to 1.84. We had been holding just at 2.1.
Right.
Europe, France, what, about 1.4? Right. Meanwhile, the Muslims in those countries have 3.4 children per couple.
Talk about the book again. This is an example about progressivism. And by the way, Hillary is slightly progressive. She's pretty scary and crazy. But Bernie is what I call a Bolshevik scary progressive. The title of the book and how they can obtain it with that number that's like 14.
Oh, sure. We have seen the future, and it looks like Baltimore. Baltimore, by the way, the city that gave America Nancy Pelosi. Her father was the mayor there. She grew up in a Democrat machine political household. And it's about progressives versus the progressive dream versus the American dream now being undermined by progressive policies. To get the book absolutely free, and this is a 252-page book, and we'll pay the shipping, we'll pay everything. This will not cost you a penny. Just call toll-free. That's free to 800-630-1494. That's 1-800-630-1494. Just leave your name and number. Have you heard Lowell Ponte on a show somewhere? 800-630-1494. And we're happy to give you the book. Why do we do this? Because, as you mentioned, I work with Craig Smith, who you see every week on with Neil Cavuto on Fox Business and Fox News. Major self-made entrepreneur, started 30 years ago with a $50 company, turned it into a multi-billion-dollar company. And he doesn't need the money from selling a few books.
Right.
And I'm just honored to be working with him. We're just trying to save the future for our children and grandchildren.
Right, ourselves,
maintain
we
the
get life
Constitution,
extension.
maintain the Republic, maintain some semblance of freedom here.
Right, and also save it for ourselves. I mean, we are 5 to 20 years maximum away from what we call zero life extension, which means people don't need to get physiologically older even if they get chronologically older, and it's within our grasp now. if people live 5 to 20 years, they may not die of senescence. They may die of violence, starvation, war, a meteor shower, or a gamma burst, but they're not going to die of the typical degenerative changes that occur. Because
that is if you have a will to live. And that is one of the things progressives love destroying in people. By saying you don't even exist as an individual.
Yeah,
you exist only as a member of certain groups.
Yeah.
And if you're in the wrong group, if your skin is the wrong color, if you're on the wrong end of the economic spectrum, you are to be snuffed out. So that all power, all wealth, all property can be transferred to the ruling elite, the philosopher kings. We're all supposed to be equal, but as George Orwell wrote in Animal Farm, some animals are more equal than others. And so we have this. By the way, just as an aside, if I may, Secretary of State John Kerry was in Hiroshima this week to pay his respects, not to apologize, they emphasized. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has said he would consider the U.S. giving Japan and South Korea help in acquiring their own nuclear weapons so they can defend themselves and make China nervous. I once wrote a very interesting paper. Forget about Hiroshima. What we should be looking at is Nagasaki. Right. Nagasaki, the setting of that famed Italian opera about a sailor and a Japanese girl. Nagasaki used to be the western port. It was the one port where Westerners were allowed to dock and do business in the country, so they wouldn't contaminate the population. As a result, Nagasaki became the most Christian city in all of Japan, the only city that had a Roman Catholic cathedral. When we dropped the bomb there, the whole target was changed from another city to Nagasaki, even though it had no military significance at all. And the bomb was dropped less than a quarter of a mile from the one Catholic cathedral, the one Christian cathedral in all of Japan. In other words, it was systematically designed to destroy the only Christian city in Japan.
The
one city that Christians had fled to, saying this is the city that the U.S. will, of course, not bomb.
Right, and isn't that remarkable?
Well, these were progressives who did the targeting. That's my point. And it should tell us something about what their real moral values are all about, especially from Roosevelt and Truman. But this is just how evil and how sinister the whole progressive movement is in terms of destroying the Western tradition. Oh, meanwhile, elsewhere in the news this week, another $5 billion is to be extracted from Goldman Sachs. This so that their executives don't have to go to prison. This has become the trade-off because the Obama administration couldn't get enough money from Congress, a Republican Congress. They've gone over to using fines and penalties to squeeze billions out of people. In fact, they've squeezed $110 billion just out of the 5 biggest banks in the country.
But they don't stop the banks. They don't stop the banks' bad behavior. They just fine them. They just fine them after they do something illegal, and it doesn't change their behavior, does it?
Well, let's understand. The banks are certainly no angels, but the banks were reacting in the property crisis and the bundled mortgage issue and the whole thing we all know so well to a government law that demanded they give loans to people who are utterly uncreditworthy. And so to get out from under that, they bundled and insured packages of bad mortgages and sent them off. In other words, it was political pressure distorting the marketplace that caused a lot of the problem. And what's funny is they went after, for example, J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan is not a sweetheart bank, but it was not involved in the property real estate thing. It hadn't even gotten into it, and government agents came to them, high government officials, and said, oh, please, in 2008, we have major banks like Washington Mutual about to collapse. Will you save them? And so J.P. Morgan said, oh, all right, only because you ask us, we will bail out, we'll buy Washington Mutual and a few other banks. Then the Obama administration turned around and said, and now that you bought them, you've acquired all the criminal penalties that attached to them, and so they imposed tens and tens of billions of dollars of fines on J.P. Morgan for doing government a favor, for doing a buyout of those banks that government begged them to do when they didn't even want to.
Oh, my.
I mean, this is how the game is played. It's not. There are no angels on either side here, I'm afraid.
Well, the problem is right now they set the bomb, and I can hear the tick, tick, tick sound of the too big to fail banks ready to fail. And when they do, remember, we're moving step by step toward biometric currency and the total absolute control by the government of everything. Every transaction, every communication. And once they create
it'll be called the cashless society, yes.
Right, and it'll be, what they're doing is they're converting the middle class to what I call the gruel class, where all you get is another bowl of gruel, and every day they play at least one showing of the Oliver Twist. May I have more, sir? And a bowl with Oliver Twist.
Please, sir.
Please, sir.
You want more?
More? You want more? Why, boy? You've had enough.
Well, that is just about what it's come to be. And, of course, the government will have total control over the media. Not that they don't now. I mean, why else were they giving $2 billion worth of prime airtime from the liberal media to Donald Trump?
Well,
I mean, if people doubt how rigged this whole system is.
Right.
But anyway, what the government now is doing, they are the 17 sinister attorney generals, 17 Democrat attorney generals in the U.S. have now filed legal action in the last few days against many of the energy companies in the country, and they've even extended their threat and their subpoenas to the Competitive Enterprise Institute, saying any of you who have said we don't have global warming, you are to be sued for evil things that you've done to the public. We may have to make them up, but we will make them up. And so now there is a straight-up attempt to just silence all opposition on things like the global warming issue. It's part of the corruption of science that you were talking about in medicine in an earlier segment. Science itself is going away as a free realm of communication and thought that lives by experiment and proof. It will now just be the new religion. A religion of the Greens, by scientists wearing white coats. They will be the new priesthood, and they will tell everyone what to think, and what you must eat, and what medication you must take, and what you're allowed to say.
And above, there'll be a symbol above all the new, we call birthing centers, where women won't worry about having children anymore. You'll submit your gametes, and if you have polar body exclusion and there are no genes that make you disruptive against the state, the child will be born in a specific birthing ceremony 9 months after it's hatched in their artificial uteri. And while reproduction will be a crime punishable, people say, no, that can't happen, Dr. Deagle. Yes, if we continue along the line that we're doing with progressivism, and by the way, it's in both parties. When we see people like Paul Ryan supporting all of this omnibus bill, and Mitch McConnell saying he could work with Hillary Clinton, don't expect that the Republicans are free of this.
And we have pages and pages on that in the Baltimore book. Why? Because progressives were the early supporters of eugenics.
Attention all shoppers, it's cancellation day. It's a big adios. It's just a few hours away. And that's what's coming, people. The big adios is coming, so you better get yourself prepared. I see the balloon, and I see a man running with a blindfold on. His name is Barack Obama, or maybe Janet Yellen. And they're running with a big pin in their hand, and that balloon is the too big to fail banks with the arrangements, as you said in this last couple segments, set by government policy that have forced companies like Goldman Sachs to do policies that have purposely made them do things that are, quote, illegal, and then fine them and then suck off the money to do things that don't require congressional or Senate approval, to take these giant fines to do more weird projects.
Oh, sure, and as we discussed with our earlier book about banking, called Don't Bank on It, The Unsafe World of 21st Century Banking, we got into things like bail-ins. By the way, a major Austrian bank just this week has been subjected to a bail-in against its investors. This is where the government, instead of using taxpayer money to save a bank, uses depositor money or investor money and just takes them both and saves the bank with that. If you want to call it saving, because most of the banks have been de facto nationalized. They're so heavily regulated that they don't really have much freedom to make decisions anyway. So, for example, you put some money in a bank. We just saw Denny Hastert in the news again a few days ago, former Speaker of the House, who was arrested for taking his own money out of his own bank account in order to pay a blackmailer. It wasn't admirable that he was paying the blackmailer to keep hidden, but the fact is it was his money, it was his bank. So the problem is you take money out of your bank, the bank is now required by law to report that to the government to spy on you, in effect. And it doesn't have to be $10,000, as in his case, where he tried to conceal that. It simply has to be an unusual transaction. If you come in and suddenly ask for $1,000 and you don't normally do that, or you deposit $1,000 in cash, the bank may have to report that just because it's unusual financial activity for you.
Right. Wow.
So the government has turned your bank into a spy agency against you.
Right.
We were also talking during the break about genetics. I know these are huge topic jumps, but nevertheless interesting.
They're all tied together, though.
Because once upon a time, not that long ago, the early progressives were big advocates of eugenics. They believed we should breed human beings like racehorses. We should weed the inferior genes of mental defectives and so on, or criminals, out of the population by sterilization. One of the women who helped in that movement, a major figure, Margaret Sanger, of course, became a founder of Planned Parenthood. Still famous to us in this day for selling baby body parts. And she would appear before Ku Klux Klan meetings and talk about how the real purpose of their endeavor was to reduce the black population in America, and what a noble cause that was. Even today, blacks are 12.5% of the population, but 25% of all abortions. So they're being aborted at twice the rate of their share of the population. And if you wonder about abortion, I was reminded of Hillary and Bill Clinton the other day and something they were famous for, and that was VAPCON. That was a government program in which they declared, secretly albeit, that all those who opposed abortion were technically potential terrorists, and so they engaged in mass surveillance of them, including bugging the telephone of the Roman Catholic Cardinal of New York. So if anyone called to confess their opposition to abortion, that could all be recorded.
Wow.
I mean, this is how far Hillary Clinton has gone in her opposition to abortion, because abortion, as so many say, is a sacrament. It's a holy act by the Church of Progressivism.
Right, but the thing is, even if you wanted to stop and separate babies, which is really rational, you could just simply put a valve in. There's a doctor in San Antonio now almost 30 years ago discovered a way of putting a very simple, very inexpensive valve in by a transumbilical procedure, and you couldn't get a pelvic infection or pregnancy. It was impossible. And then you wanted to have a baby, you just simply turn the valve back on, and boom, you get pregnant. So you don't need hormones, you don't need abortion, you don't need any of these things. The thing is, they want the sacrament of abortion. They want to traumatize women because it also makes them, not only does it increase the risk of cancer of breast and uterus and so on, but it makes it harder to form relationships with men and bonding with their children after they've gone through a traumatic abortion.
Sure. And lest I forget, Barack Obama's science czar, John Holdren, was co-author of a book that actually advocated adding chemical sterilants to the world's food and water supply, with the antidote to the sterilant being held by government. So therefore, the government, if you wanted to have a baby, you would have to go to the government and get a government permit or a small amount of the antidote so you could become briefly fertile to have a chance at having a baby. Now imagine an Adolf Hitler with that power. He wouldn't even have to create ovens and killing camps for Jews. He would just say no Jews need apply for this antidote to the sterilant, and in one generation, Jews will be gone.
Well, you know, the thing is, they really stop needing to being global control freaks and should just go into writing alternative, B movies. You know, they'd probably be very successful because they would be big blockbusters. People would say, that could never happen. That's not going to happen, but it's really entertaining to eat popcorn and watch this craziness on the screen. People need to get it. You know, the biggest thing, I go through this list of levels of consciousness, and I try to get through to people. When you're dealing with friends, relatives, colleagues, professors, etc., there's 4 levels: aware and prepared, Pollyannas that don't think there's a problem, pet rocks that basically have a smile on their face but there's nothing going on, and finally what I call the viciously ignorant. That's like the progressives, that if you raise an issue, they feel offended that you actually ask for logic and evidence to support your thesis, whether it's global warming or their craziness about eugenics.
The whole purpose of educating you in government schools is to make you obedient. I mean, to make you automatically willing to believe what they tell you.
Including Common Core and this idea here in California where they want to teach you all these alternative lifestyles. So you really don't believe that a family is made of a mother and father. It can be made of any combination, or you can make transhumans. For example, Zootopia in the future could mean, yes, you can have a conversation with your dog or cat because you've spliced in human genes by the CRISPR protocol and made a animal-human hybrid. And people say, that's not possible, Dr. Deagle. I'm saying, I'm sorry, I can give you the equipment list.
Oh, no, they need to study CRISPR. CRISPR.
Right. And the thing is, my background is in genetics.
You'll be shocked and amazed. Just look it up on Google. And this is standard gene manipulation technology now.
Right. Now, I'm waiting for my abuse, because when I write articles, like I'm putting one out in Fukushima this weekend, and I wrote one a few weeks ago on Zika virus and the OX513A gene from Oxitec from Oxford, now bought the corporation out by Intrexon that says better living through better DNA. And, of course, our U.S. government fully supports them and the release of these OXY513A gene mosquitoes. But the jumping genes, the riddle genes, jump into other species, phyla, and genera because lots of organisms, including plants, have double-stranded DNA.
Yeah, I once did a whole Reader's Digest article when I was the science editor there on jumping genes.
Right.
It was lots.
The problem is they have what's called transposons and endonucleases that allow them to insert themselves anywhere in the genome in multiple places. And the problem is that they're now polluting the genome of the entire biosphere, but that's what they want. People don't realize the boundless evil of these maniacs. They don't understand that now that they're into Pandora's box, they're opening up the lid and say, the end of biology and life on Earth as we know it is here.
People need to study something like, for example, tilless agriculture, where they now will create a genetically modified corn plant, for example, and then, so you don't have to dig up the soil in your field. All you have to do is spray it with the universal kill chemical, against which the gene in the corn you buy from them is immune. So they can create a subgroup of human beings who will not be killed by a particular something they're going to drop on the planet.
Wow.
And then, when all the rest of the planet is dosed with that, if you don't have their gene, you die. If you do have the ruler gene that they implanted in you as one of the chosen to serve them, then you will live. I mean, and we already have the prototype for that in modern agriculture now.
Right. Well, the things like this riddle gene, these other things, they can start inserting genes throughout the entire biosphere. And if you don't have the gene, either by an injection from a vaccine or by being injected by a sipping mosquito like the Aedes aegypti or the albopictus mosquitoes, you don't have the genes. I mean, people say,
and by the way, we have a lot of these kinds of ideas in the book about Baltimore. It's far more than just Baltimore. Get it? 800-630-1494 is the number. It's absolutely free and postpaid.
So it didn't just give us the wire. It gave us lots of plans of how to destroy America and the world. Baltimore maybe was the beginning of the end. How's that?
God help us, but it could be. They've degenerated people to a phenomenal level there.
So there's a lot more lessons to learn from the miniseries The Wire.
There are.
Thank you again, Lowell Ponte, 800-630-1494. He'll be back in a few weeks.